Hi, this is Florian again from lifesciencementor.com, and this is day 4 of the 180-day Idea Machine Challenge. And today I'm going to talk about 13 Coursera classes that would be interesting that you could take. Some ideas that I have in mind. We live actually in really amazing times. If you think about it, we don't even need to go out to a library if you want to learn about something new. Certainly, in most cases, we don't need to go to an expensive college or school. We can teach ourselves via the internet. And in some aspects, we could even offer courses ourselves. I mean, we put like a year, 2, 3 maybe into learning a skill, then we are better than the average person is doing that skill or doing something that nobody else can do. And so we can teach it to people. And the topic for today is exactly that, Coursera courses that I'd like to take, meaning courses that I think they're interesting and that could also be maybe inspiring and interesting for you. All right. The first one would be go-kart driving. Go-kart driving, I'm doing that sometimes with friends, but I never really figure out how to accelerate, how to brake properly, how to get into curves, what the forces are when I try to steer and brake. And there are classes on racing cars, and every go-kart track has a little introductory course in most cases. But it would be neat to know a little bit more about the basics behind it, and then have little lessons where you could just go to a kart track and practice. And since sometimes these tracks tend to be overcrowded at holidays or weekends, it may be also good to have some to be able to recognize what a good track is in your neighborhood if you have one, how much money you should pay, what are good times to go there to learn for yourselves. Maybe are there even competitions where you can take part in, and so on and so forth. That would be the first class I'd like to take. The second that would be interesting is genealogy. I know something about my ancestors, but I believe that your personal strength also comes from knowing who you are, what your ancestors did. For example, I studied science like 2 decades ago. I started to go into science. Something drew me into science, and I'd be ever so curious to know why that was. Because most of my direct family, they are either school teachers or actually a reverend. My father's a reverend, and no scientist really in my like under my great uncles. There's one exception. One great uncle was a scientist, but nobody else really was. Or maybe there was, no idea. So I like to know who my ancestors are, and I believe that adds to your personal strength once you know where you come from, and you don't need to rely on how things ought to be. Society tells you so many things, how you ought to behave, how this and that ought to be, what good behavior is, and so on and so forth. And we should all be like some standard behavior, and I think that's wrong. You need to know about who you are to be able to connect to others. That would be point 2. Point 3 would be how to spot trends. It's probably an old dream of many people, but I'd really like to see a Coursera course about that, because you can actually Google trends. There's a subdivision of Google. You can go to trends.google.com, type in any word that you want, and then you'll see the development of that trend, like how many people have searched for it over the past year. And you can even project it into the future, right? So if you want to know what is a good topic, what may be even more interesting in the future, how to spot a trend would be great. And how I would make such a course, you would probably compare similar events in the past. What led to these events? Like, that's maybe a grim example, but that is a prominent one. So how did nations slide into World War One, and how did nations again slide into World War Two? Did they slide, or was there a certain group of countries that really took them forward? In case of World War Two, that seems to be the case. With Germany, was that the same? Was that the same in World War One? What are similarities? What are differences? And those are global trends, right? So how can you use the knowledge from those global trends to predict single trends? How did Steve Jobs know that when he invented the iPod, how did he know that people would want to have a computer device that plays music when there were MP3 players already around and they weren't doing very well, right? So how did he know that design is really something that could take off for people? How did he know that? Did he take any precautions? Did he kind of like hit on that trend by accident? And so on and so forth. And if you know some principles of how trends develop, you can try to figure out something for yourself. Figure out how you make a video or blog post go viral, how you communicate what you want to others, that you can attract more people to your case. If you want to grow a movement, what do you do? How do you prevent global catastrophes like wars or genocides even? That's maybe a lot to ask for a little Coursera course, but it's certainly important to know, as a famous ice hockey player once said, Canadian, the name I just forgot, that he wanted to skate where the puck was going to be, not where the puck is right now. And I think it's a very valuable talent or capability to have to spot these trends. That would be my idea for Coursera course number 3. And number 4, if you have a family, you want to raise your kids, and I think you want to raise your kids as strongly as possible. So I would title that course "How to Raise Your Kids into Warriors." Right? You want your kids to be able to brave whatever life throws into their way with fortitude and as independent as possible, not rely on anything else for solving their problems, and actually know when to ask somebody else to solve their problems. I think these are both things that are lacking in many people, myself included. And so a course like that would include how to instill rituals and traditions in them, because that like a recurring ritual bears a lot of possibility for making character really strong, right? When should you be lenient, right? When should you be strict? What value could you add as a father to your kids' education that your wife could not, and vice versa, right? So you recognize not everyone can do the same at the same time, right? So you have different roles, and how do you fulfill these roles? When you're divorced, how do you raise the kids if you're by yourself? Or how do you partake in the kids' life when they are raised by your wife and you're now divorced? How do you strengthen your kids without overindulging them, right? Those would all be questions I would love to have a course about. Homeschooling. More and more people want to homeschool, and once I have kids, I would actually think about that myself. Because the thought of handing my kids over to a stranger who takes care of their education, and I don't really know what they do with my kids, and if they follow the ideals I want to teach my kids, I don't really know. So I would want to homeschool my kids more and more. And so questions I would have are which classes I should offer in which order. How do I make sure that my kids socialize properly when they are just at home and they don't get into contact with 20, 30, 40, 100 people at the same time, right? So do you teach in one block of time, or do you do like small blocks interspersed over the day? And what would be subjects that are not in any current curriculum that would be great and important to have? For example, financial planning, retirement planning, financial health. How to find a career that not only you like yourself. I mean, that's important, but you want to choose a profession where you serve the market with some product that is in demand, right? You need to understand that principle to be able to make money. It's great to say you do what you love and the money will follow. And I do believe that anything I do, the money will follow. And it's great if I love what I do, but I have to be cognizant of the fact that not everything that I love to do for myself will be great for everyone out there, right? So I think Mark Cuban once said, so you become passionate in something, you start a little bit, you start doing it, then you become better. Then you like it a little bit more, you do more, you become even better, and then in the end you are passionate. But the first thought, I think, needs to be a product that people really want. So this talent that needs to be instilled in early education, and that would be something I would want to teach my kids if I homeschool. Um, Weight training, martial arts, fitness, important parts, and I don't know whether they are really well taught in school, right, nowadays. So that would be something interesting for homeschooling. Myths and rituals. Where do you come from? What are the tradition of your people? You know, what traditions are in your family? What rituals make you strong self, right? That is something important. And then bearing from that, how to be a leader. Those would all be subjects, and there's probably 20 more that I didn't think about. It would be good to know how to integrate them into a homeschooling curriculum. And last but not least, if your kids want to be able to compete in the labor market and maybe take like a job in a corporation even, then you need some certificates. How can you make sure with homeschooling that your kids have these certificates? Number 6, how to leave your job behind and start new. Most people, they are actually frightened of starting something new. You know, you start, you're in your one job and then you switch to another job. And I took a break from doing science because I wanted to get my head free and then start applying. If I want to go back to science, to academic science, that would be fine as well. Or if I go back to go into industry or do something completely different, that would all be fine. But I wanted to have that choice. I didn't want to just stay in the corporate hamster wheel and think it's a career ladder when in fact it's just a wheel, right? So to do that, I'm faced with questions like, how do I use my prior experience to slide into new profession, right? When fields are completely different, how do you transition from one career to the other? When the new career doesn't have anything to do with what you did before. For example, if I would start in sales, so I had several things that would help me still as a scientist, right? I would know how to solve problems. That's good for any task. I would have learned to do long-term problem solving. I have some talents, like when it comes to microscopy, I've learned that. So how can I leverage that in a new job, like skill of observation, right? All these skills, if you choose a completely new field, you will not be able to take your old skills and talents with you, but then you can learn to leverage the core of these skills for a new profession. That would be good to know. So our differences if you choose to get a new job when you're 20, 30, 40, 50 years or older, right? The older you are, the more experienced you are, what you can do, and you know yourself better, right? If you're younger, maybe you have, you can like, you have, I don't want to say more energy, but you are more flexible. You have to try out more things, right? And if things don't work out, you can try it for 2 years, you do something new. So that changes when you're older, right? A whole different set of questions that you ask whether you're 40 years old or 20 years old. And it's still possible in both cases, so it would be good to have that covered in the course. Number 7, exotic travel. So one thing I thought about, it would be cool to just do a deep sea expedition into the Mariana Strait, right? Like 10,000 miles under the surface. That's a travel that has you don't get a normal tourist guide to do that. Or if you want to go camping in the Antarctic or in Himalaya, or you want to survive in the desert for a while, or in the jungle where nobody else is really there. How do you prepare for such exotic travel, right? If you want to do it without a guide, if you want to choose a guide, how do you choose this guide? How do you choose a good guide? How do you recognize people that can lead you there? How do you prepare for dangerous or unforeseen events? How do you interact with local tribes that are there but didn't have much contact with civilization yet? So how do you get into contact with them, and how do you respect their traditions and maybe just leave them be? But you need to know how to react to unforeseen events like that. A course that covers that would be interesting. Renovating an old house. So instead of building a house or buying a house that is as good as new, being taken great care of, you could also get the idea of buying an old shuttered down house, right? You pay maybe only $20,000 and then you put some work into it, right? So what are guidelines to do the renovation? What are good people to hire? How do you comply with local zoning regulations? Is there a certain type of house, of rundown house, if you want, that you should look for if you're willing to invest only small money but want to get like a lot of money out of it? What's the amount of work that you need to put in? How do you choose a house that you want to renovate? Maybe you just want to renovate some rooms from the inside, right? How you choose a house for doing that? How do you determine the strength of the structure? Do you keep wooden beams in place, or do you just take them out and replace them with new ones? And the reason that I'm asking that, there's one observation from my past. When I lived in Dresden to do my PhD, Dresden is in Eastern Germany, and in Eastern Germany, people didn't have money to renovate old houses, and that's a fortunate thing. Because in West Germany, after the war, many cities were destroyed all over Germany, but in West Germany, governments tore down old houses altogether. They had enough money to build new ones, and then you have like this infamous 70s style box-like architecture, whereas that was also prevalent in the East, especially so in very socialist cities, but they simply didn't have money to do that to all houses. So after the wall fell down, you had now all rundown houses from the outside that you could renovate from the inside, and so then you have a traditional structure still intact, and they look like brand new from the inside. And that was always fascinating. Like, I had walls that were thick, like, kid you not, were thick like that, right? I could play cello forever because nobody would ever hear me. The walls were so thick, and it was great because they looked like modern inside, but they had like huge walls, had a great structure from the outside. It was really a pleasure living in these houses. And if I ever get to renovate a house, how do I do that the same way? Number 9, sleep. REM and non-REM sleep. How do you sleep well? If you can't sleep, how do you have different methods? How can you fall asleep more easily? Is it better to sleep in one block, or interrupted sleep patterns? People nowadays think that people in medieval ages, and you see it from paintings, they did that. Sometimes people were up at night while other people were sleeping. It was much more common to be like 2 hours asleep, 1 hour awake, and then 3 hours asleep, 2 hours awake, and so on and so forth. That would be good to know whether there are differences in sleep patterns that could actually help you maybe become healthier. I would be interested to learn more about that. In connection with that, lucid dreaming. If you have concurrent nightmares, how do you take control of these dreams? It's like Inception, right? That movie, how do you know that you're dreaming when you're in a dream, right? How do you take control back? I did that in the past myself when I was young. I would always have nightmares in the morning, like the nightmare I could never get out of. And it seemed like ages being in a dream, and that kind of sucked. So I taught myself, like, this morning I really, when I fall asleep, I will really, really be aware that this is a dream. And very slowly I taught myself to, to consciously move my hands, and then eventually I would be consciously able to move toward a bigger house and just jump down, because then I would wake up, and that worked. So how can I learn lucid dreaming? Number 11, 3D printing, hardware and software. That's a budding new area that may be hugely disruptive, you may say, to a lot of industries, when in the future you'll just be able to, you don't have to buy anything, you can just make it yourself, whatever you need in the household, a little screw or a pen or whatever you can think of. In medical technology, people can now put cell cultures into a 3D printer, and and then you have maybe an artificial heart. You have the connective tissue grown in a lab as a scaffold, or maybe even with a 3D printer, and then you bombard that connective tissue with cells and seed them on those connective tissues, and then they build a new heart. And the cells are taken from your organism, from adult stem cells or from your embryonic stem cells, and then then you will be able to grow an organ in the lab that would have no conflict with immune reaction, anything like that, right? You can do that with a 3D printer, and that would certainly be an attractive area to know more about. So how's good software to program a 3D printer? How do you learn the programming languages? How do you couple the computer with your printer? What are material properties that you use for 3D printing? Not all materials are good for printing, I guess, right? What should you be aware of when you buy a 3D printer? If you want to do professionally, how much do you invest in a 3D printer? And so on and so forth. Number 12, how to design the perfect Coursera course. If you learn something and want to teach that yourself over Coursera or Udemy, it would be good to know how much do you need to know yourself before you start teaching. Is it better to stay very general or become very specific? How do you advertise and spread the word for your course, and which platform do you choose for your courses? Or do you do it completely self-hosted or maybe via YouTube, right? How do you get your courses carried by an accredited institution, right? Aaron Clary has 2 courses out on personal finance, right? You can take them at a normal online accredited institution, right? And they can actually be useful for you when you want to apply for jobs, right? You can get a certificate for them, something like that. How do you do that? And number 13, mentoring. How do you teach someone? How do you recognize people's abilities and potential? How do you assert their strengths and weaknesses and square that, leverage that with the way they learn best themselves, right? How do you spot and nurture a specific talent? If they are good in a field that you are not, or if you learn that they become better than you, how do you hand them over to a different mentor, right? How do you make sure they strike out on their own very smoothly? A lot of mentors become jealous of the success of their students, and then they start sabotaging them. That was with Michael Faraday. I'm bad with names. He learned by a very renowned French scientist or scientist with French name. And while he learned a lot from his mentor, later on his mentor started sabotaging him because he realized that his student will surpass the mentor, right? How do you avoid that as a mentor? How do you get out of your dominant position as a teacher so that the student dares to strike on his or her own, right? Sometimes you overshadow the student and then they don't dare doing anything. Those will be my 13 ideas for Coursera courses. Go-kart driving, genealogy, spotting trends, raise your kids into warriors, homeschooling, how to leave your job behind and start new, exotic travel, renovating an old house, sleep, lucid dreaming, 3D printing, how to design the perfect Coursera course, and mentoring. I hope I could inspire you with these ideas of courses. I'm certain there are 100,000 more. Let me know if you want to do one of these courses. I'd be interested to take them, and it'd be funny to know. And I hope I could inspire you in your day, and you could take something out of my ideas. If you want to follow me on your journey, you can sign up there under lifesciencementor.com. This is day 4 of the Idea Machine, Become an Idea Machine Challenge in 180 days. It's also linked to the article where I introduced the book by Claudia and James Altucher. And leave me a comment. I answer every comment. Or make sure to like this video so it can be found by more people. And that's it. Thank you for having me, and see you again tomorrow. Goodbye.